Some stories never make the headlines, some victims remain nameless, and some mysteries fade before they're ever solved. If you're drawn to the strange and unexplained, from cryptids and aliens to hauntings, true crime, and everything in between, you need to check out Unknown, Unsolved, Unseen. Hosted by Frank and Sage, this podcast dives into a plethora of unexplained phenomena. They research, discuss, and share their own opinions on stories that linger in the shadows, from the unsolved to the unbelievable. Listen to Unknown, Unsolved, Unseen wherever you get your podcasts, because every story, no matter how strange, deserves to be told.
Research and recording of Canadian creepies happens on the shared land and traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. A key treaty governing this territory is the Dish with One Spoon Agreement. This treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee people binds them to share and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, settlers, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. We all share the responsibility of ensuring the dish is never empty, meaning we must take care of the land and the creatures we share it with.
Welcome, wanderers, to journey down the crooked path, a place where the stories are stranger, the shadows stretch longer, and the things that go bump in the night might just be listening. I'm Amanda Joy, your guide into the eerie, the forgotten, and the downright bizarre. Here, we step off the well-lit roads of Canadian creepies and venture into the murky corners of history, folklore, and the unexplained, where the whispers grow louder and the truth is never quite what it seems. So let's take a deep breath, watch your step, and whatever you do, don't look back. Once you start down the crooked path, you never know what might follow.
Picture yourself somewhere up north, where the trail line thins out and the ground feels like it's holding on to that very last cold snap. You get the usual mix of wildlife out there: moose prints pressed into the mud, a rabbit darting across the trail like it's late for something, birds flying high overhead. It's areas like this that Canada likes to brag about when it comes to its wildlife. And if you've been out here long enough, you notice the smaller animals as well. Monarchs drinking from milkweed, dragonflies sitting lazily across a pond. But there's soil, too, that looks a little too soft in one patch, a ripple under the moss that maybe shouldn't be there, something pale sliding back into the ground before you get a proper look at it. You tell yourself it's just another harmless thing in Canada, right up until you realize it's bigger than you thought, and moving in a way that dirt shouldn't move. Canada has plenty of beautiful wildlife, and also, sometimes it's really creepy and terrifying. Here are a few stories of Canada's giant worms. If you head down into the forests that stretch through southern Ontario, Quebec, and upper state New York, you run into stories that have been around longer than any of the borders on this map. Nations of Iroquois Confederacy have kept accounts of a worm that is nothing like you would expect to find in the northern woods. In 1918, Jeremiah Curtin and John Napoleon Brinton Hewitt wrote down one of these stories in Seneca fiction Legends and Myths, and it starts with a boy hunting. Now, this boy was looking for birds when he spotted something on a branch, a worm, except not the kind that you'd step over on a rainy day. This one was big and bright with colors that didn't make sense with something of that size. He stood there long enough, staring at it, curious, and on the next day he went back to see if it was still there. It was, but this time it was sitting on a different part of the branch, almost like it had been waiting for him. That morning, the boy had taken some birds home, so he tore off a little bit of meat, stuck it on a twig, and he held it out for the worm. And the worm ate it. Not a whole lot, but it did seem like the worm liked it because he kept coming back again and again for more meat. Each time the worm took a little bit more. Before long, the boy was handing over entire birds, feathers, and all to this worm. It got so heavy that the branch couldn't hold it anymore, and the worm collapsed to the ground, and it just stayed there. It made no effort to find its own food. It just waited for the boy to show up and feed him. Eventually, the boy started bringing his friends to see the worm, and they started feeding it too, tossing whole birds at it and watching it change color as it swallowed its food. Now, the boys kept all of this under wraps. They didn't tell anyone about it. Instead, they would sneak out early every single morning, catch something, and feed the worm. And the worm grew fast. It grew long and thick, big enough that the boys stopped pretending that it was harmless, even though they kept going back to it. Now, one morning, they were messing around, and the youngest of the boys got a little too close to the worm, and the worm scooped him up before anyone could do anything about it. The boys all panicked, but they didn't say anything when the adults started to ask questions. Instead of staying away from the worm, they pushed a few more boys towards it the next day, and the worm ate them too. Realistically, it had just gotten so big that it didn't care what it was eating. It wasn't until the worm ate a whole deer that the boys finally started to stay away from it. One morning, the whole village woke up to find the worm wrapped around the hilltop, blocking every single way out of the village. The group tried to slip through what looked like an opening, only to walk straight into the worm's mouth. The survivors in the village burned tobacco and called to Hinun, the god of thunder, and asked him for help. A storm cloud moved over the village, and lightning hit the worm again and again until it broke apart. What was left rolled down the hill and settled in the valley, and it turned into a lake. If you flip through early exploration notes from the North Pacific, you'll run into something odd tucked in between those wind charts and the compass readings. This next worm may not be giant, but it's definitely worth talking about. Early North Pacific explorers kept running into a small swimming worm in the stretch of the water between Hawaii and the Pacific coast. Not particularly oversized, nothing that would make anyone think monster, but it had colors that changed with the lights and lines up a little too neatly with the stories of worms from the Iroquois nations. They kept finding these worms with Medusa Velella, those tiny blue gelatinous animals that float on the surface with a thin sail on top. They're a colonial hydrozone, not jellyfish, but they behave like jellyfish in the sense that they drift wherever the wind pushes them. James Cook was the first person to write down these creatures. In spring of 1778, during his third voyage, the ship had hit a calm patch, and the surface looked smeared with what he called slime. Mixed in, there were the usual jelly-like creatures, but there was also a second type of animal, smaller, brighter, and everywhere. His crew scooped up the animals into a glass cup of salt water. When they sat still, they looked like tiny little bits of silver, but once they started moving, all sorts of different colors started to come through. Blues, to pales, to deep violets, greens, reds. Enough glow that Cook said it lit up the water around them. Daytime, the animals would give one set of colors. By candlelight, another. In the dark, they gave off this faint, fire-like glow. William Anderson, the naturalist on board, decided that they were a new species of woodlouse. He named them Oniscus fulgens. 14 years later, George Vancouver sailed through the same water and ran into the same creature. The field of the Medusa Velellas stretched as far as he could see, and each one carried a little blue worm about 1.5 inches long. They were thickest near the head, 3-sided bodies, folded membrane underneath that let it hold on to the Velella, short fibers along the top edges that looked like it was built for moving through water. Vancouver said that Archibald Menes thought that this belonged to a new Genesis. Now, Archibald was the naturalist aboard George Vancouver's expedition. He was a Scottish Navy surgeon, similar to the kind of scientist that William Anderson had on Cook's ship. His job was to examine whatever the crew pulled out of the water or off the shoreline and write down what he saw. Now, Archibald did write about these. He said that he hauled up a bucket of the Medusa Velellas and found a worm attached to every single one.
You. Yeah, you. Still haunting the same old fast fashion? Time to dig up something better with Back from the Dead Goods, a Canadian small business where forgotten threads get a second life and sustainability meets spooky. This isn't just upcycled clothing, it's resurrected fashion with an eerie edge. Handpicked, reworked, and revived, every piece is as unique as a ghost story whispered at midnight. And because you're a part of the Canadian Creepies family, you get an exclusive deal. Use code Canadian Creepies at checkout for 10% off. Find them lurking on Instagram, Etsy, and Poshmark. Links are in the episode description. Give your wardrobe a second chance at life, if you dare. Looking for your next obsession? The Creators Collective Podcasts is your gateway to the dark, the chilling, and the downright fascinating. We're a community of independent podcasts with one goal: to share the best in true crime, paranormal tales, folklore, and unexplained mysteries. Whether you crave cold cases that won't stay closed, haunted histories that refuse to be forgotten, or stories that make you sleep with the lights on, there's a show waiting for you in the collective. And when you join us, you're not just listening to one podcast. You're stepping into a world of creators who love this stuff as much as you do. Check out the Creators Collective today. Follow the link in our show notes to discover your next favorite podcast. We'll be waiting for you. Let's take a moment during this break to talk about something that matters. Something that doesn't get to be background noise. The Anishinaabe-Moan word, Nikinagana, means we are all related, and we are. But relationship isn't just about words, it's about responsibility. Canadian author Naomi Klein once said, "It is not enough to say that we live on Indigenous land. We have to act as if we do." And one way to do that is by supporting Pay Your Rent, a grassroots mutual aid initiative that offers direct material support to Indigenous organizers across this land. It's not charity, it's rent. For those of us who aren't Indigenous to this place, it's a way to show up differently, to redistribute some of what's been taken. The Pay Your Rent Fund started as a one-time request for help in 2018 and grew into a nonprofit called Nikinagana. Your monthly or one-time donation can help provide food, hygiene supplies, housing support, and resources for Indigenous-led resistance and community care. So if you've ever said, "We're all related," ask yourself, are you being a good relative? Visit payyourrent.ca and find out more about how you can be part of something better. Now, back to this case.
He moved the worm into a glass of salt water and he watched it shoot around in every direction. The colors on this creature changed with every single turn, bright tones that shifted with the angle of the light. He measured it to be about 1/4 of an inch long. It was oval, flattened, and transparent. It had 8 segments behind its blunt head, and each segment was tight through the middle and slightly apart towards the edges. It had short antennas, short legs, and a tail made out of 2 bristles about 1/5 of its body's length. He kept Anderson's name for it. The name Oniscus fulgens never made it into modern classification, and so the question just kind of hangs out there. What were these blue, translucent, fine-haired little swimmers that changed color every time the light hit them? Now, the author of the story that I originally got this from has said that he does not have a background in marine biology, so he fed the description into a few AI programs to see what they would come up with. The AI told him that it was most likely nudibranchs. However, what Cook, Vancouver, and Menzies were describing is not anything like a sea caterpillar to me. If you head east into the forest of New Brunswick, you will run into another creature in the worm family tree. The Passamaquoddy Wabanaki call it the Weewillmekq. It's basically the same general idea as the giant worm stories further west, but it has its own maritime flavor. It starts off as a small worm, only a couple of inches long, living in dry wood. Lightning seems to be incredibly attracted to it. If it gets enough to eat, it can grow past anything you'd expect to see in an actual tree. Once it reaches the point where the branches can't hold it anymore, it grows horns and moves into water. Now, most Passamaquoddy storytellers call it a worm, although a few compare it to an alligator or some kind of water creature that you really wouldn't want to meet up close. Charles Godfrey Leland wrote down a few of these stories in 1884. One of them follows a man and his wife who flipped their canoe on the Straight John River while moving to their fall camp. They lost everything, including the man's gun. So they're sitting on the bank and they're trying to figure out what to do next when two travelers come upon them. One of these travelers is a medicine man, and he asked the man if he would recognize the gun if he saw it. But before the man could answer, the wife chimes in and said she could. The medicine man warned her that getting it back would take a lot more nerve than she thought she had, but she told him she wasn't worried. So the medicine man took her to the ledge, about 75 feet above the reversing falls, in what is now St. John. She sat at the edge, looked down at the rapids. Something rose out of the churn, a head with forked horns and eyes that did not look friendly. Her husband's gun sat across the horns like it had been placed there on purpose. The creature drifted closer until she could grab it, but she froze. It slid past her and went under and took the gun with it. Another one of the Passamaquoddy stories that Leland had written down was from Campobello Island. This story starts with a young hunter who caught the attention of a sorceress. She asked him to marry her, but he turned her down because he was getting ready for the autumn hunt and didn't want anything getting in the way. Well, she didn't take that too well, and she ended up putting a curse on him. Later that season, he and his older brother went deep into the forest. Midwinter hit, and the younger brother lost his mind under the weight of the curse. The older brother didn't know what to do, so he went down to the river and sang the song that calls the Weewillmekq. I call on the Weewillmekq. I call on the terrible one. On the one with the horns. I dare him to appear. The older brother stood by the river and sang the call. The Weewillmekq came to him with a full set of horns and fire-bright eyes. It asked him what he wanted, and he told him that he wanted his brother's mind back. So the creature says, "Sure, you can have your brother's mind back, as long as you're not afraid of me." And the guy replies back, "No, I'm not afraid of anything." The creature questions again, "You're not afraid of me?" To which he says, "Not of you, or even the devil himself." So the creature dares him to take a hold of its horns and scrape a little bit of it off with his knife. And so the man does this until the creature tells him to stop. The creature gives him some very simple instructions about what to do next. He says, go back to camp, put half of the scrapings from his horns into water, and make the younger brother drink it. He says the rest of the scrapings needs to be given to the girl who put the curse on them in the first place. So this is exactly what the hunter does. He makes this horn-scraping concoction drink for his brother, who drinks it, and pretty quickly, his younger brother is back to his normal self. So they finish their hunt, and they head home. When they get back to the village, it's dark. The lodge was lit up with a dance going on inside. The younger brother, he has this mixed drink of sweetened maple syrup and herbs, and he puts the rest of the horn scrapings into this. The seamstress who had cursed them, she comes into the doorway. She's tired and overheating from dancing, and she's looking for something to drink. So the younger brother hands her the cup. She doesn't even ask who it came from. She downs the drink and goes back to the dance. The Weewillmekq isn't the only oversized creature in northern stories. The Western Inuit have one of their own. In 1899, William Edward Nelson wrote about something that they called the DTCP. He translated it as the Great Worm. He described it as a huge caterpillar-shaped creature that could appear as a worm or as a person, depending on the story. Some of the ivory carvings show a long body with a human face at the front. A similar idea shows up around Great Bear Lake in the Northwest Territories. Cornelius Osgood wrote about the Dene in 1931 and mentioned a whirlpool near Good Hope that the locals have connected with a monster whose tail blended into the hills. He also said that there was a group of islands on the lake that people avoided. One of them had limestone caves and smelt like sulfur. According to one of his informants, a massive worm lived in there and pulled down anyone who passed too close. The usual canoe routes stayed behind the island. One year, a group cut in front of the island instead. Every canoe except one went straight into the sudden whirlpool. A lone canoe that lagged behind was the only one that made it through. The rest were assumed to have been taken by the worm. Worms absolutely give some people the heebie-jeebies, and the idea of huge worms can be incredibly unsettling. Stories like these make the woods seem like they're a hell of a lot busier than maybe they actually are. And maybe that's all there is to it. Big worms in trees, big worms in rivers, big worms wading under the surface of a lake the size of a small sea, and stories. But every now and then, someone brings up something else. Something with legs. Something with too many legs and 8 eyes. And suddenly the worms don't feel like the only thing worth worrying about. But that's a story for another time.